So, as hopefully there'll be some information here that you can take with you. I want to clarify what this lecture is not. First of all, this lecture is not going to be about how to get motivated to practice. I'm going to assume that you're already motivated, that you have that concert date set and you're motivated, or maybe for some other more intrinsic reason. If you are interested in developing better practice habits in terms of I just need to get that habit going of doing it every day, there's a wonderful book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. It's a new book that's out, and it is fabulous. Louder? Louder! Okay.
A little bit louder.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And also, if I'm going too fast, please let me know. I've had a lot of coffee. And I can do this whole lecture in my head in like 10 minutes, so I don't want to do that to you. I'm not going to talk about how much time to spend on technique, how much time to spend on sight reading. These are really personal things. I can tell you most assuredly, if I had to spend a half an hour practicing Hanon before I could play my music, I would not be a pianist, because that would be a non-starter for me. Everybody's different. For some people, that's a wonderful thing. Some people need a specific warm-up. So you need to do what works for you. And discovering that is part of the development of becoming a musician. I'm not going to talk about the stuff you need. There are copious books and articles about how to dress, make sure you have a pencil, make sure you have a metronome, whether you have good lighting, make sure the temperature is exactly comfortable. I can tell you that some of the best practice I ever did was in 90-degree room with no air conditioning and 90% humidity in the middle of the summer in North Carolina on an upright, and it was awesome practice because I was focused on what I was doing, and that was all that mattered. So it's really important to figure out all those logistical things for yourself in whatever way works for you. And I don't want to minimize how important all those things are. It is important. If you don't have a pencil, you can't mark that fingering, and you're going to forget it. So those things are important, but they're pretty simple. And I think most of us reach a point where we know those things, and we've figured out how to do those things. So what I want to talk about is how we learn, how we get better. That's what's supposed to happen in our practice. We're supposed to get better, right? I mentioned this lecture to some students in the hallway a few days ago and said, I was really hoping to get some videotape of some students practicing. She said, oh, not performing, just practicing? And I said, yeah, practicing. And she said, gosh, isn't that kind of private? Private, okay. If you don't want anyone to hear our, that's how we're practicing. So we know that the practicing we're doing is not something we're terribly proud of. We know there are holes in it. We know there are problems. I hate hearing this from my students. I practiced it for 2 hours, and then it was gone. Gone. Just disappeared. Okay. We remember what we understand. If you're really there and you're really focused, and you understand what you did, it's not just going to go away. Okay? When my daughter was 4 years old, she saw me doing a lot of teaching, a lot of practicing, and my students would leave and I'd say, oh, they don't know how to practice. And she said, Mommy, I know what practicing is. Really, honey? She said, it's when you teach your body and your body teaches you. And I thought, wow, yeah, she's kind of right there. That's right on. She's just watched what happens and what should happen in a practice session, and she knew that at that age. There is a recent study that came out that everybody's quoting now about how many hours it takes to become an expert. And Anders Ericsson did a study, he's now at Florida State University. He did a study on young violinists, and I think they did another study on pianists as well. And it was how many hours have the students put in who become successful musicians. And the result was, it's about 10,000 hours. You need to put in your 10,000 hours or you're not going to be an expert. And they were able to extrapolate this to other fields. Experts in other fields need their 10,000 hours. Now, it never fails. I'll mention this to a class, and they pull pull out their calculator. Okay, how many hours have I done over the last week? Okay, how many hours do I have left to go before I become an expert? And I'm sorry, that's not how it works. I remember when I first started college, I was very excited to have long stretches of time that I could practice, and I would spend 4 hours, 6 hours a day. On the weekends, I could get 8 or 10 hours in. I was really excited by this. I thought, man, this was before the 10. I didn't know anything about the 10,000 hours. I just knew you had to practice more than everybody else, right? You had to work harder. I had the work ethic going. So at a certain point, I asked my teacher, who was really just a phenomenal pianist and had a vast repertoire. I grew up in a family of musicians. I said, so how much should I be practicing? And he said, well, if you can't get your work done in 4 hours a day, you're not concentrating hard enough. 4 hours? I'm supposed to get everything done in 4 hours, and I had all this repertoire. I was supposed to, oh, okay, concentrate harder. I remember asking his brother the same question. He was a cellist. I said, how many hours do you practice? And he was a very successful cellist. He said, well, it depends. If I'm concentrating, if it's going well. I try to practice every day, but if I'm not concentrating, I'll just may as well go for a walk or make a sandwich, because, nothing's going to happen. And I realized that there's another piece missing besides just the hours. We do have to concentrate. So the study shows a correlation, not a causation. You can't just put in your 10,000 hours and be an expert, right? And in fact, Anders Ericsson talks about the type of practice that has to happen. And this has, of course, become this big thing. Everybody goes, 10,000 hours. Now he's talking about, no, not just any 10,000 hours. There's a specific type of practice that has to happen. Have to have deliberate practice, meaning you have specific goals. You get immediate feedback. And you concentrate as much on technique, that is what you're doing, as on how it comes out. So you're not just putting in your hours. One of the big turning points for me, I was quite young, probably 14, and I went to a music camp, 2-week piano camp, where we did nothing but piano, which was fun. And one of the classes I took was a sight reading and practicing class. So sight reading, you can imagine we worked on our sight reading skills. The practicing, the assignment she gave us was keep a practice log. Well, practice log, what's that? Well, at the time it was just a plain old spiral notebook. And she had us draw a line down the middle and say, okay, here are my goals on this piece. And over here is a white column where I'm going to write the results of those activities. After I set my goals, then I practice, then I write the results. And I record the time. And I estimate how long I think it's going to take me before I start. That was a turning point for me, because it was the first, and I thought, this is stupid. I'm going to sit there and write. It's going to take me forever to write this out. I'm going to waste my practice time, my good practice time writing. Not a waste of time at all, because it made me stop and think, well, what is it I'm sitting here about to do? I'm not just going to practice my Chopin for 2 hours and feel virtuous. I'm going to actually set some goals. So I typed up sort of a version of what this would be. I don't know if you can see this, but basically this would all be handwritten at the time, but basically specific goals. Metronome numbers, being specific about what's going to happen. Oh, I need to get that middle section faster. I want measures 16 through 30 at 120 with no errors. That's my goal. I'm going to review measures 1 through 16. I got to get those left-hand notes evened out. Those are just a mess. And I'm going to sight read that last section because I haven't even started learning that yet. I need to work on that too. Then I practice. Then I write down how it went, so that the next day, when I open up my log, I can see, oh, yeah, that's where I was. I still got to work on that. Oh, I only got to 104. I've got more work to do there. Very specific goals. Very specific outcomes. Not, I'm going to practice my Chopin for an hour, and then I'll work on the Bach for half an hour, and then I'll go to lunch. Because that doesn't get you anywhere. It might. It might not. And how will you ever know if you can't measure it? So you need some way to measure it. Now, what's happened for me is I do this in my head now. And I can tell you exactly which measures I've practiced and exactly what tempos I got them to. I do have some things written in my music to that account. I don't have to keep a whole log anymore, but I strongly recommend this. If you've never done this kind of thing, do it for a month. It'll change your life in the practice room. I don't know about the rest of your life. Okay, so there's some studies that have been done on practicing. And there's some fascinating things that people have found out about practicing. One of the questions that researchers wanted to find out was, what do professional musicians, what do great musicians start with? It's well known that experts in many fields approach a new problem by identifying the general principles involved. So looking at the big picture, kind of going, okay, we know this and this and this, and then they work into the details. And they also can make decisions that anticipate what's coming. So the question was, do musicians do this? Do they start with an artistic concept in mind, or do they start with the details? Most of us have a tendency to start with the details, right? Oh, okay, that's 16, no, that's going to be hard. No, you get into the details, okay, and you get lost in there. So this pianist actually recorded all her practice sessions, 12 practice sessions on the last one of the Bach Italian Concerto, which is a tricky piece, and up to performance. And she commented as she went. Oh, here I'm working on the fingering. Oh, here I'm thinking about the phrasing. So as she went, they were able to go through then on her tapes and categorize what she was focused on. And they divided the categories into a few different elements. Some were basic issues like fingering, motor skills, things that you just have to get set before you can go. Interpretive issues would include phrasing, dynamics, tempo, pedal, and performance dimensions are things that require conscious attention in your performance. You know you're going to have to think about that when the performance time comes. So you're paying attention to this ahead of time. So what's interesting about this is how much attention she paid to performance issues. These are the sessions. So sessions 1 through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can see the basic issues are decreasing. She's got the fingering worked out. She's got all those things are gradually becoming subconscious. Right? They're becoming automatic. But right at the beginning, she's got her performance in mind. She's got this vision of how this piece is going to go. And she looks at the formal structure a lot. How's this piece put together? How's this going to go? How do I want this to fit? Thinking ahead to the performance. Trying out fingerings at a faster tempo to see if they're going to work. Because you can get a wonderful fingering set at a slow tempo that's not going to work at all when you go faster. So she's thinking about these things ahead of time, and then you see this wonderful part, and of course this is our favorite part. Okay? We're not too worried about the performance, the basic issues are all gone, and we can go, I'm going to play with interpretation now. Okay, that's always fun. And then of course, we've got that all worked out, and now we're just going to run it and start worrying about performance issues at the end, memory issues and things like that, that were anticipated a lot initially, but then are focused on again at the end. So this is kind of an interesting study. We usually do a lot of master classes on this day, and if I were teaching a master class today, one of the things you would hear me say a lot is, leave that out. Now leave that out. Okay, now leave all those other things out. Okay, what do we have left? Because when you reduce something down to its simplest version, you have the big picture. If you can leave out all the stuff and hear, maybe as a pianist, you hear maybe just the bass line and the melody, okay, or you hear just the harmonic structure, then you're looking at the big picture, or at least the bigger picture. The biggest picture is the whole piece, right? But as big as we can get to look at that, that's got to be our framework for working musically. Otherwise, we're not going to have music when we get done. We're going to have some really cool, fast passage work, and we're going to have a lot of notes, and maybe we'll even get rid of all our errors, but we're not going to have music. So start with the music. Start with the artistic vision of what you want, and make sure you're seeing all of that before you start filling in those details. I want to take a moment and talk about fingering because I think it's incredibly important. I mentioned that it's important because you've got to deal with it from a performance angle. The other thing to remember is anytime you change fingering, whether it's inadvertent or purposeful, you're sending mixed signals to your body. And it's kind of like somebody giving you driving directions and saying, well, you could go up here and turn left and then turn right, or you could go that way, or you could go... It's not helpful, right? You need someone, especially if you're in a foreign land, you need someone to say, go up this street, go 2 blocks, turn right, turn left, and you'll be there. And we need to connect with our bodies that way. This is our only place that we connect with what's coming out of the instrument from our body physically. That's it. That's the final connection. And if we don't do that consistently and well, there's going to be confusion in there. So doing that early, I think, is really important. So understanding the structure behind everything, reducing the complexity. Don't confuse your body with bad fingering or changing fingering, and anticipating performance developments later, things that you're going to have to deal with. So, another really interesting study was done on people practicing that were just college students. Some were doctor music, some were masters, I think some were bachelor music, and I'll show you some of the data from that. So they gave them 3 measures of a Shostakovich piano concerto and said, have at it, learn it, we're going to record you practicing, and we're going to test you again to see how well you remembered it. I can't remember whether it was tomorrow or later, but I believe it was the next day. So then they measured who was most successful in being able to play. Now here we're talking pretty much about getting the notes and playing musically, but they had musicians evaluating the final performances. And then they ranked the students in the order of who played best down to who played worst. And then analyzed how they had practiced and what they had done during the practice time. So I think this is good news. The results of the practice sessions showed no significant relationship to the amount of practice time. One poor guy put in the most time and was way down at the bottom of the list. It did not show any significant relationship to the number of times they tried the passage. Okay? It's a relatively short passage. And it didn't show any relationship to how many times they played the whole passage through. There were significant relations to the accuracy of the practice. The practice that was more accurate was more successful. In general, it was the handling of the errors that made the most difference. What people did when they made an error. And this is the thing that I hear in my students, and they come to their lessons, and they play a mistake, and they play it again, and then they play it right, and they go on. Oh, it's fixed. It's all fixed. Don't have to worry about that one anymore. There are a lot of strategies that the pianist employed, and those strategies were more determinative of how they did than how much time they spent. So here's the data. So I'll show you what these individual things are, but these are the practice strategies. Actually, I, J, and K are more descriptions, but these are all the strategies that the best ranked player employed. A whole bunch of them. So did number 2. So did number 3. And then you see it starts to disappear. Here's score number 3,410 seconds down here. He had one plan. Didn't work out too well for him. So A is playing with hands together early in practice. Pretty much everybody did that. Okay, the pianists, they know what they're doing. They go, okay, I can do those hands together. Okay. B, practice was with inflection. It was musical. Practice was thoughtful. The students stopped and said, oh, right, let me mark that. Okay, yes, let me think about this for a minute. Okay, a lot of the students did that. Errors were preempted by stopping before they made the error. In other words, they went, I'm going to make it, let me make sure I don't do that, right? Errors were addressed immediately when they appeared. And you can see pretty much everybody went, oh, made a mistake there, and noticed it and addressed it. F is the precise location and source of each error was accurately identified, rehearsed, and corrected. G, logical tempo variations according to what would help be more accurate. Okay, so, oh, let me slow it down a bit. Okay, now I'm ready to speed it up, and the errors are not persisting when I do that. H was target passages are repeated until the error was absent. So it was a successful, marking of, okay, we stabilized this passage by repeating it and making sure that error isn't going to show up again. And as I said, these are a bit more descriptive. After the tempo changes, the first trial was accurate. After the initial learning, the errors did not persist. And at least 20% of all the starts were complete and correct. If you look here, you'll see that these are the most evident in the top pianists. You see 6, and then it disappears. The precise location and source of each error was accurately identified, rehearsed, and corrected. Okay? Same with H, that's stabilization. And then the errors were not there. So you have these pianists who are really paying attention to the source of the error. And I cannot tell you how many times I have students who make a mistake and I say, what happened? And they say, I messed up. Yeah. Okay, give me a little more. What actually happened there? Which hand? I don't know. Which beat? I don't know. They're really not sure what happened. They know something went wrong and it sounded bad, okay? Or they know it was the right hand on the first beat, but they're not really sure. And then if you get more specific and say, okay, which finger? And what do you need to do with that finger to make that not happen next time? They give you this bewildered look of, gosh, you're asking me an awful lot of questions now. But that's what you have to do. You have to make sure it doesn't come back. And successful, quick learning pianists know that. It's error prevention, not just notice them and cross your fingers and hope they don't come back. So I think that's an important piece of information. And knowing that source of the error, I think, is really critical. And I tell my students this all the time. You really can't fix it. If you don't know what's wrong, you can't fix it. You have to know what's going on, and you have to be analytical and figure it out. I try in my own practice to have zero tolerance for errors. I used to have a little game I played that there was a firing squad just waiting for me to make a mistake, and boy, I was really careful. It's a little morose, I know, that's not great, but it worked. I knew my brain wasn't paying attention, so I'd look for some way to sort of bring myself back to reality like that. So I think it's important for us to find a way to pay attention to that and really be aware of that. So effective practicing employs a variety of strategies. Remember all those strategies that we're using? Okay, and revolve around problem solving, not mindless repetition. There's another study that was done on young musicians, pretty much found the same thing. There's no correlation to quantity of practice. So that thing we do of telling our students to practice half an hour every day, 4 hours every day, whatever it is, it's really meaningless. What matters is what they're doing during that time. So, and that was all for a bunch of different levels of students, young students and older students. It's the quality of the practice that matters, not the quantity. Although, it wouldn't hurt to have 10,000 hours. I should just quickly mention that during performance, it's a different matter. Errors are a different matter. Errors in performance should just be part of the landscape, and you should have an incredibly high tolerance of errors during performance. You have to just let it go, and you have to go, okay, well, here we go. Just going down the slide, and whatever happens, happens, because I've practiced carefully, and now it's time to let go of that and not worry about errors, right? You can't be tense when you're performing, or you can't perform well. So some of those things need to have a high tolerance for errors. Also, I find that large leaps on the piano are much better practiced. If it's a large body motion, practice the big motion and don't worry about the errors, and then you can refine it. But for most things that we do, paying attention to those errors is really important. So the next part that I want to talk about is not just what we do with our practice, but what we do with our heads when we practice, or when we're not practicing. As Arthur Rubinstein said, when I sit in Paris in a cafe, I don't sit casually, I go over a certain sonata in my head and I learn new things. Okay? That's practicing. That is practicing. One of the things that I think most students don't do enough of, and I probably don't do enough of, is the deep work, the depth that should go into our music. We tend to get caught up in playing the notes, playing them faster, playing them, getting them ready for rehearsal. I got this performance coming, and there's that stress all the time of deadlines and of getting things done, and even of what I want to get done in my practice today. And we forget to go a little bit deeper into things. And I think we really have to go deep in order to understand music. If you go deep, you get the fundamentals, and then they apply to everything. NFL players know that when it's off-season, they're going to pull out their videos, and they're going to start looking at their schemes, and they're going to figure out their plan, and they're going to study the tapes and break down their moves, and look at the field, and notice everything from a much more abstract point of view. Because when they're in the on-season, they're tired, and they're in pain, and they're just trying to do it. So they know they're not going to have that kind of focus when they're on the field. They do it in the off-season when they have that time. You know, for us, practicing every day kind of feels like it's always the on-season. So we need to take this time and make time to look at things more deeply. I really believe that detailed study leads to elemental knowledge that unlocks creative potential. It allows us to be creative when those little things that we've studied so carefully can just become natural. With young students, one of the first things I do is, and this is within the first 6 months, I make sure they can do a really beautiful two-note slur. Because if they can't do a beautiful two-note slur right away, they're never going to play beautiful Haydn, beautiful Mozart, beautiful Chopin. They're never going to learn to end a phrase properly if they don't start getting that and doing it. And when they're young, they can do it, and they're okay with that narrow focus at that time. But a lot of us forget that we need to go back to that and pay attention to it if we haven't. So those small things are critically important. Part of what slow practice should be is not just slow practice because my teacher told me to practice slow and because usually I don't make as many mistakes when I practice slow. That's not what slow practice should be. Slow practice should be the chance for us to really go deeply into what's happening in the music so we can hear it more thoroughly, so we can feel it in our fingers more thoroughly, so we really know what's there. There's an account by Abram Chasins of Rachmaninoff practicing Chopin double thirds etude. If you know that piece, it's supposed to go very, very, very fast as you can play it well. And Rachmaninoff was practicing this piece. Abrams took out a watch and timed him. It was about 20 seconds per bar, which is about a second per note, which is very slow. And it was so slow that he couldn't even recognize the piece for a while. He stood there and went, what is this piece? And then he finally figured out that that's what was happening there. So we don't really know what Rachmaninoff was doing, but he obviously wasn't practicing for speed at that moment. And he was obviously doing something here. And maybe something here that had to do with what happens here, too. Because we can connect to those things better when we do them slowly. I tell my students all the time, race car drivers will often, I'm told, go out on the racetrack before the race and go like this. And look at it, walk it. The thing they're going to drive 100 and whatever miles on, when they get going, they're going to walk it because they want to see everything that's there and put it in there so that when it's going by like that, it's all there. And I think we need to do that. And I know from walking past the practice rooms that you guys don't do that enough. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the power of visualization, but it is pretty incredible. And this is another thing that we can do internally that is amazingly powerful. There was a famous study at the University of Chicago with basketball players, and they divided some basketball players up into 3 groups of people, and they gave the first group, they said, okay, go away to practice free throws every day for an hour. Here's your basketball, get out there, do it. Second group, they said, don't touch a basketball, but pretend. Practice in your head. Pretend you're shooting free throws. Okay? And then, of course, they had a control group. The third group was the control group, who did nothing. And the results of the study were pretty alarming and surprising and wonderful. The first 2 groups improved the same amount. The people who practiced with the basketball got just as good as the people who pretended to practice with the basketball. I should hasten to point out this is not the same as lying about your practicing and saying, I pretended to practice. Like I admit I did a few times when I was 8. But visualizing practicing is a different thing. And the way I check my memory is when I can lie in bed and see, hear, feel the whole piece straight through from the beginning to the end in my head, all of it, every single note. For me, I don't need to see the page. I need to see the keyboard. Everybody's different, but for me, I need that physical connection, and I can feel it in my fingers, and I can hear it accurately. Then I know it's memorized, and I don't worry about it, because I can do it here. I can make it happen here. So visualization is incredibly powerful. They've also done another study at Harvard recently, and this was really fascinating, I thought. And this was on piano playing. Took some people who were not pianists, put them in a room and said, here, you're going to practice these little cute little pieces. They're pretty simple pieces, but you're going to practice for 2 hours a day, every day for 5 days, and we're going to measure your brain every day when you get done practicing, and have electromagnetic coils that they put on the brain. You could actually see or infer what the neurons were doing in their brains. And I think one researcher described it as, it was like a field of dandelions in suburbia, like the neurons that were exploding in that motor cortex area that they looked at in these people. They were developing this new skill. So their brain was growing and changing. So they decided to take this a step further and have people come in and sit there and pretend, visualize practicing. So they didn't touch a keyboard, they visualized doing it. They imagined doing it. And guess what? Their brains changed too, just the same way. So you can change the physical structure of your brain just by what you think about. I think that's important information for all of us in every aspect of our lives, but it really pans out well when you're practicing. Okay? I know that when I'm getting ready for a performance, I'm practicing all day, because it's here, all the time. I'm making breakfast, it's there. Okay? So the practicing doesn't have to stop when you leave the practice room, and you can visualize. Really good visualization is going to be thorough. It's going to be, you're going to feel it, hear it, smell it, you know, whatever, taste it. Okay. So another piece of what happens inside us that I know is missing for a lot of people in daily life, and definitely missing in some of my students in their practice, is being present. Really just being there, taking in what's happening, not thinking about other things. As Philip said, you may as well go make a sandwich, right? If you're not going to really be focused. So part of staying focused is staying present and staying engaged. And if that means saying, okay, I don't know what to engage in, I'm going to engage with my third finger on every note that it plays, whatever. It doesn't, you know, if you can draw yourself back in somehow with good presence and good engagement, you can get back into it We all know that feeling of the brain wandering. I have a rule, I don't touch the piano if I'm not 100% present. And the instant my brain goes like this, I stop, and I grab my Post-it note, and I write down whatever that stupid thing was that got in my way, that I didn't want to forget to call so-and-so, or whatever it was. I write it down, I put it aside, I gather myself, and I'll practice again. But I don't practice if I'm not there, because it's a waste of time. Presence is, we hear these stories about when everything's on the line, you're in an accident, everything goes slowly, right? Everything slows down, we're very present. We hear stories of women lifting cars off their children, right? So, you suddenly become this sort of superhuman existence in a way. It's a survival mechanism that allows us to focus and channel all our energy, our physical and mental capabilities to a really astonishing degree. Being fully present is a very, very powerful thing. People have described it as being profoundly calm, but with a razor's edge. So there's a very, very calm feeling, but very alert. And that's that sense of time slowing down. In the practice room, we're by ourselves. When we lose presence, you're not going to fall off a cliff. Okay, there's no life hanging in the balance. There's not even an audience to disappoint. Right? There's really no pressure. So knowing how present we are and being aware of that is a really good gauge of what we're doing there. The quality of presence is what we want to be aware of when we're there. And I think a really wonderful book called The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. I don't know if many of you have read that book. It's a really terrific book. He was a chess champion. He was actually the young man that the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer was made about, because he was a young prodigy and sort of got overwhelmed when the movie was made because there was a lot more pressure on him. But he since has turned his energies to how do we learn, and wrote this terrific book called The Art of Learning. He's learned other things. He's become a champion in other fields, after having been a chess champion. But he says, those who excel are those who maximize each moment's creative potential. For these masters of living, presence to the day-to-day learning process is akin to that purity of focus others dream of achieving, only in rare climactic moments when everything is on the line. And he says the secret is, everything is always on the line. And if you can remember that, you will stay present. So one of the ways we stay focused has to do with how we recover from stress. And this is really interesting stuff that's, people have always said, 45 minutes, then you should take a break, right? Psychologists will say, oh, you should only practice, or your teacher might have told you, only practice the song, then take a break every hour, take a 10-minute break every hour. And that may be what works for you. Everybody's going to be a little bit different in that. There's a recent study by some psychologists who studied tennis players, top of the game tennis players, and they looked at all these phenomenal tennis players and compared them to pretty good tennis players. Okay, so we're comparing, really amazing to pretty darn good. And they could not find a difference. They looked at hours and hours and hours of videotape of these people swinging the racket, hitting the ball in games, and they couldn't find a difference. They thought, we're going to see something here, some physical thing, something going on while they're playing. Nothing. Couldn't find anything. So they backtracked and said, all right, let's look at what they're doing when they're not hitting the ball. Turns out 65% of the time on the court during a game is not hitting the ball. And what those excellent players who were at the top of their game did when they were not hitting the ball was completely different from what the players who were beneath them did. The players who were really excellent took that time. It was an average of 16 seconds. They took that time after an error or after a stressful thing. If they made an error, they replaced the image. So they did something this way, they went, oh no, I should have done that, whatever. I'm a tennis player, I can't show you. Okay. They replaced the image. Okay? I don't want that in my head. I want this in my head. So I'm going to do that motion. Okay, I got that motion. Then they relaxed. You could see it on their faces. You could see it in their bodies. Completely relaxed. Then they did mental preparation for what was about to come. And you could see this as them looking over the net, thinking about what's going to happen, focusing on what's about to happen. And then a lot of them had rituals. So they bounce the ball or whatever they do to get ready to be on, to hit again, to be in the game again. So those 4 things were consistent with all those top players. And this all happened in about 16 seconds in between. That's about an average. The less successful players showed their emotions, their eyes wandered, they showed discouragement, they looked around. Okay? I have some bad news for you. The bad news is that your brain imprints more vividly things that don't work than things that do. So, being upset imprints it even more. You dig that hole deeper. And I see my students, oh! So, it's not going to help. Okay? That is not going to help you get focused on what you need to do now. You need to figure out what it is, re-image it, relax, get set, and go. But you can't sit there and be upset about it and beat yourself up. I remember playing for my teacher and getting very upset, as students tend to do. Said, oh, you know, that was terrible. That was awful. And he said to me, don't get upset. He said, don't judge it, just evaluate it. You know? And he said, the wrong note is always twice as loud when it's your finger that's on it. Really wasn't that bad, but it sounded like it was to you. And I had this whole thing going on of how bad it was. And it was my picture of what was happening. So that helped. I have some bad news for couch potatoes. They have found that doing interval training for your aerobic capacity and your heart actually helps you with this cleansing, this ability to recover from stress quickly. Works better if you're fit. If you exercise and you're capable of getting your heart rate up and back down quickly, that's actually a good thing. Works better for your brain. We need havens of renewal. We need time to gather ourselves. Those are big havens and small havens. So don't be an American. Take your vacation time. And then the other thing is the one haven that we all need, that we all tend to, at least in this country, really jip ourselves on. It's the one place where our memories go into permanent storage. We know now this is the function of sleep, or one of the functions. You need to sleep. Okay? Nothing's going to happen in your practice the next day if you don't sleep the night before. So those are all really important things. I'd like to talk just a little bit about our attitude toward practicing and our attitude toward playing. It's very important that we keep an open mind. Part of what will make you a really effective learner is that you seek out challenges. You want challenges. You're looking for them. And that takes a certain amount of confidence within yourself to say, I don't care how I look, I'm just going to go for it. They've done a lot of study on how people view challenges, and probably some of the most famous studies are young children with math tests, and they give them a hard math problem or a couple of hard math problems, and the kids will say, some of them will say, oh, I'm just not that smart, I'm no good at math, I can't do this. And other ones will say, well, I don't know, I couldn't do it, but I think if I studied harder, I could do it. So those are two different ways of looking at things. Students who seek out challenges do better. Students who believe in that incremental theory, that is, incrementally, I can get better, I can do a little more every day, a little at a time, I can get better, they do better. There's a lot of research that's been done on expertise in many fields. Chess is sort of it's sort of the fruit fly of this sort of thing. but there are other fields that have been looked at. And what they found is that people who rise to a very high level and become experts participate in what's called effortful study. Effortful study is what we do when we're learning something new. When you first were learning to drive a car, that was effortful study. You paid a lot of attention to everything, and you learned to do it, and then you relaxed because you passed your driver's test, and you probably haven't gotten a whole lot better since then. Maybe a little, we all learn a little bit here and there. But most people plateau. Effortful study is constantly challenging yourself, always reaching for that thing that's just beyond. I sometimes make the mistake of thinking that everybody has this attitude, and my students will say, yeah, I really want to work hard, and I'll give them a piece, and it's just out of their range, and I think this is going to be awesome, because they're going to just go like this and rise to that challenge. And unfortunately, not everyone has that attitude, and they stay right there, and I'm disappointed as a teacher, but I'm learning not to do that or to measure my students more carefully. But this is how I've always learned. I go, wow, I don't think I can do that, but let me try. Because the trying is the fun part. Because that's where I'm going to really work, and that's where I'm going to see. That's the fun part. Then you're on the steep part of the learning curve, which is really the fun thing. So experts keep the lid of the mind box open all the time so they can inspect, criticize, and augment its contents, and thereby approach the standards set by leaders in their fields. Josh Waitzkin says, when aiming for the top, your path requires an engaged, searching mind. You have to make obstacles spur you to creative new angles in the learning process. Let setbacks deepen your resolve. It's too easy to get caught up in the routine, fall into a mental rut, a disengaged lifestyle that implies excellence can be obtained by going through the motions. We lose presence. So, be an incremental theorist. Believe in the power of hard work. You can do it, a little at a time. Believe in that. The other piece of attitude that I think is incredibly important is being able to let go of our ego. Dr. Peters always says, check your ego at the door. Meaning, we don't need your ego in here telling you that you're not good enough, or you ought to be better, or you're so great, or any of that kind of stuff. When you're a young beginner, you just have fun. You just study. Wow, this is cool. Even if you're an older beginner, you start something new, and you go, wow, this is kind of cool. I'm learning this thing, and it's fun. And you're really not worried about how you look doing it, right? You're not focused on that. You're just having a good time with that. And then we start to get good at it, and we go, oh, I'm kind of good at this. And people are noticing that. And all of a sudden, it becomes this thing. And we carry that ego with us, and we expect ourselves to be good, and we lose that openness. And that is the death to learning. Because then you can't learn anything. All you're going to do is try to live up to your own expectations. So, let go of the ego. Be willing to look bad. I love this interview I heard on NPR. There was a woman physicist who was on, and she had gotten a Nobel Prize for her work. And it was pretty outstanding stuff that she had done. And they said, so what is it? What sets you apart? There are a lot of fabulous scientists out there. What sets you apart and makes it so that you're that much better at this, that you're doing this kind of research? And she said, well, I don't know, I guess I just have a higher tolerance for confusion than most people. And I thought, that's what you gotta have. You gotta be willing to sit there. I mean, anyone who's done hard math, you sit there and you go, I'm confused and I hate it, right? And you're just so mad because it doesn't feel good to be confused. Because you think, if you're smart, you ought to be able to do it, and you know that good feeling that comes when you get it right, and you can do it. And it's the same thing with music. You've got to be willing to sound bad. You've got to be willing to sound just god-awful, and then go, okay, so that's bad. How is it bad? What can I do? What do I mean by that? And that's where what Stephen told me, don't judge, evaluate. It's not on a scale of good to bad. It's on a scale of what's going on in the music. What are you hearing? What can you fix? What can you change? So if we can cultivate this childlike playfulness that allows us to just kind of go, oh, okay, I'm just going to have fun with this and not judge myself, then we really have something. I love this quote from that process. The famous baseball player. I really do believe this is true. We do have to put in the hours. There's no question you have to put in the hours. You have to do the hard work. You have to show up. But a lot of what is not happening in students that I see is up here. They're not really focused, they're not engaged, they're not present. I hear them make a mistake and then attack it again with the same mistake and then attack it again with the same mistake. Or they'll hit a chord 3 times before start. What are you doing? Gather yourself, think about what you're going to do, then play. With focus, with presence, with awareness, without judging, with just listening and responding and evaluating. My daughter helped me set up this PowerPoint, and I said, I don't think I have a conclusion. And she said, you need a summary, you need a checklist. They're going to want a checklist. So here's your checklist. You've got to put in the hours. There's no question about that. You need to work from an artistic vision. You need a lot of practice strategies. Everything your teacher told you, and everything your friends told you, and everything you can think of, and all those things backwards, do them. All of them. Because something might work really well for you, and you don't know unless you've tried it. Effective error correction is huge. You are going to say you can cut your practice time in half right now if you do that. I swear to God, because when Stephen told me you should be able to get it all done in 4 hours, all of a sudden I was paying so much attention that I could get it done in 4 hours, which was pretty nice. I gained a lot of time. And then I could sight read and have fun and go to concerts and things instead of just practicing. So it's much better for me. Go into the detail. When your teacher shows you something about a body motion, about a phrasing concept, go to the smallest detail of that. Go to the 2-note slur. Go to the littlest piece of that you can. Figure out how that works, and it's going to work throughout all your practice. You've got to be willing to get down to that nitty-gritty. I can't tell you how many times I've spent just working on 2 fingers for a half an hour. And I was fascinated the whole time because I was trying different things with those 2 fingers to try to solve the problem that showed up in the second phrase of the Beethoven. But I had to go to that level to figure out what was going on and to work it. And maybe I just needed more strength. Well, maybe it was coordination. Maybe it was this. Maybe it was that. I had to work it that hard. You go to that small level, go deep, and you'll really have something. Do your visualization. Spend time at the piano when you're not at the piano, or at your instrument, whatever that is. Hear it. Visualizing is, for us, is hearing and feeling as well, right? It's not just visual, it's everything. Being present, and you should do this all the time, every day. Do it right now. Breathe. Feel your breath. That's important. Focus through recovery. You get your focus when you give yourself time to recover from what just happened. Take that moment, like the tennis experts. Don't be afraid of challenges. Look for them. They're everywhere. They're all over the place in your music. They're in the first bar, okay? Look for those and find them. And if you can't find a challenge, make one up, because they're there. Believe in the power of hard work. You can do those things. Maybe not today, maybe not even this year, but you can if you work at it. Be an incremental theorist and believe in that. And keep your mind open so you always are clear about why we're doing this. We do this because it's fun, right? Because it's wonderful, it's beautiful, and we love that learning curve. We like being on that going, oh, I'm gonna learn, oh wow, I figured this out, right? That's why I do it. Maybe that's not why everybody does it. I love that part of it. And I love sharing that with people. And I love the product when I get up to perform, that you get to hear all that stuff that I figured out, that it was so cool in my little practice room by myself. So there's your checklist. I'm sure there are about 18,000 more things we could add to that checklist. Did it in under an hour. Yay. I was trying for that. I would like to actually open this up, take a couple of minutes. If people would like to, I don't have the answers necessarily, but I would be happy to go, well, maybe you have the answer to that question and kind of moderate things a little bit. I just want to open it to comments and questions, or just like someone going, I really think this works. Always have a pencil. So, please feel free, jump in. Or questions.
Is it possible to get a copy of your PowerPoint?
It is. I don't know how exactly, but my daughter will. Yeah, I actually meant to bring cards so that you would have my email address. It's pretty easy. It's fortepiano@aol.com. fortepiano@aol.com is the only email address I use, and I will send you any of this that you'd like.
Kirsten, I was thinking about this when you were talking about effortful study. Like my old conductor, he used to quote Yoda, and he said, "Do or do not. There is no try." So I kind of don't believe that, actually. And you were saying like you have to try, right?
No, what effortful study is, maybe it's the description that's a little bit confusing. Effortful study means that you take on new challenges. So you're always looking for, how can I take something new from this? So I'm not just kind of going along with it and going, yeah, I know how to drive now. Pretty much got that down. You're thinking about, how can I be a better driver? So you're focused on improvement, and that's the effortful study. You want to get better. It really comes from a desire of wanting to get better, not just kind of going along and hoping it'll happen somehow.
Yeah, but I'm still wondering whether you believe in that statement or not. Like just going 100%. If I don't do it, then I might as well not do it. I mean, or is there such thing as a try?
As trying. You know, I know, and a lot of people say that. They say, don't. I think that the issue comes up with trying when people say, okay, I'm going to try. And there's this mental sort of cloud that comes down. You know, I can stand here and try to raise my right arm really hard. I'm trying really hard to raise my right arm, right? And it's not going up. But I can go like that without even trying. If I just let it happen, if I let the flow go. And that's what presence is. And if you're really present, it will just happen, and it won't feel like you're trying, and you won't even notice that 3 hours went by because you were present the whole time.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. That does. Thanks.
Anybody want to comment on that or something else? We can all learn from each other. I know you guys all know something I don't know.
I would just say for the trying thing, there's a difference between trying with the goal of doing your best at it and trying just like, I'll give it a shot, I'm pretty sure I'm going to fail, but I'll try and do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really a matter of where this is when you're doing that trying thing and what that means.
Having presence when you're trying.
Yeah, and not getting in your own way by going, I'm going to try now, right? Because that kind of blocks the whole connection of what's supposed to happen. That book that I was referring you to, The Power of Habit, talks a lot about what happens in our brains when we develop a habit. And it's fascinating stuff. I didn't get a chance to put it in here, but basically when you develop a habit, like say you already know how to drive the car and you are backing the car out of the driveway, which you do every morning, that is an incredibly complex set of skills that the first time you did it took all your energy and all your focus, right? Once it becomes a habit, you can do that and think about what you're going to have for lunch or what happened. Like you can remember that you forgot something from inside the house as you're doing that, because all that is on automatic. And what happens to the brain is when you start your habit, when you go, okay, I'm going to back the car out of the driveway now, there's this peak of activity, and then it just drops off. And then at the end of the habit, there's another peak of activity again. But in between, basically habits are a way of saving energy in your brain. So you can just do the thing and not have it take effort. So it's actually tied to that concept of trying and not trying. So some things you develop the habit and going to that micro scale and getting those good habits, then they're there for you. You don't have to think about them. And so it kind of reduces that feeling of trying. Nancy.
The author of the book, The Power of Habit.
The Power of Habit is by Charles Duhigg, D-U-H-I-G-G. If you email me, I have a bibliography that I'll be happy to share with you. I'm not sure everything is on it, but
Do you know the publisher's name?
I don't offhand. I have a hardcover copy because I was that excited by the book when it came out. Yeah.
Well, you spoke about the fact that it's not necessarily the number of hours that you practice or how many repetitions, and of course some of the studies are bearing that out as well. But could you maybe just go toward the topic for a moment of consistency and cramming practice? I'm sure that you're not advocating that one.
No.
And I know you didn't mean to say that at all, but for this audience, would you mind talking about how we're balancing that?
Not at all. And that is part of what the part of the reason we need to sleep between each practice session and therefore practice every day is because that's where everything becomes solidified in our brains. Muscle and motor memory does not develop instantly. It takes time, and then those patterns that you develop one day when you sleep and then wake up the next day, they've solidified. So you need that constant cycle of solidifying what's happened in your practice. And that's why we have to do those hours and hours. Yes, if you're talking about, can I end load that and do all my 10,000 hours next year? Or my 100 hours right before my jury? No, it's not going to work because you can't stay present and you can't stay focused for that much time to catch up for what you're trying to do, and you don't have that solidification going on. It has to happen every day so that you have that going on. And that sort of, it's a cycle of putting the information into permanent storage so that then you can pull it back out again. And gradually what happens is you've got these layers so that when you finally get up to perform, all those basic layers, you saw the chart, I remember I was playing, all the basic stuff was gone. She wasn't thinking about any of that basic stuff. It was gone, and that was because she'd done good practice for all those sessions. She'd done really focused practice on all those basic issues 12 weeks earlier. And then those things tapered off, and she didn't have to think about those anymore. So by the time she got to performance, all she had to think about was performing. She didn't have to think about, what do I do, that kind of stuff. You can't cram that. That has to happen over a period of time. Yeah, excellent point, Kevin.
I have a question. You mentioned performance a little bit, so practicing up until that point. As far as, like, when do you know when to stop doing the interpretive process and the performing process? Because once it's performed, like, because I've heard teachers say, you're going to know this piece for the rest of your life, you're going to keep. So, when you're done with the performance, what point do you go back and practice? Like, what?
That's a personal question. He's asking when you're done with your performance, you go, I played my Beethoven, it's going over here on that shelf. Now I'm going to work on something new. It's really a personal decision as to when you come back to that piece, but I can tell you, there's music I haven't touched in 30 years, and I pull it out and I go, oh, I didn't know that was there. Wow, oh, this is cool. And there's stuff I've learned about this music in the meantime, not from hearing that piece per se, but from learning about Beethoven, from learning about technique. I go toward things with a whole new mind because of all the things that I've learned since then. I think for college students, a big part of what you're doing is trying to develop a core repertoire that you can refer to for the rest of your life. If you get a nice, vast repertoire while you're here, that's going to be stuff that 10, 20 years from now, you come back to, it's like an old friend with, that's aged, and become deeper and more interesting. So I don't think there's any specific time, and I'd be happy to, if someone else has a comment on that. Other teachers, I don't know. I think it just depends. And partly it may be your passion for the piece. If you're so sick of that piece you don't ever want to hear it again, put it away until you do. And then you'll be focused on it and you'll do good work on it.
And I guess it's also that, like, some you can tell when you have the errors like that, but as far as in the interpretive process, like, how do you know when to stop that and area the performance?
There's no end, really. To the interpretive process, there's no end. What you were seeing on that graph was what she was focusing on in her practicing. She was making final decisions about, what am I going to do with this pedaling? And exactly, wait, am I going louder here than softer there? Am I going to do it this other way? And making those decisions so that they weren't up in the air in performance. Some things we leave to chance in a performance. We leave to inspiration. If we've done really good work, we can just kind of let go in a performance. And all of those things that we decided on are going to be sort of fixtures, right? But the things that we add to it and we bring to it in the performance are going to be the things that are truly inspiring. Does that make sense? So I don't think you ever let go of it. It's just a matter of where you're putting your practice time. If you don't have your fingering down and you don't have your notes down, you should be knowing what you want to do artistically, but you don't need to make those teeny decisions about those things. I mean, I think it all kind of works together. It's all happening at the same time. It's just a matter of how you balance it. And you've got to have the basic stuff down first. But you can't do the basic stuff if you don't have the artistic image in mind.
You mentioned earlier that we get aggravated when you make a mistake, it just makes things worse. And I know that's one of my issues. I make a mistake when it causes my mind, it leads to me not being present. And I keep repeating the same mistake over and over, and that just makes me more upset.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you just like had any tips on just how to stay level-headed when you're practicing, or how to just get over it.
Boy, I'd be happy to have people help me field this, but my first answer to you would be, take a breath. Remember that you're there to teach yourself. Be as nice to yourself as you would be to somebody else, to a student. Comment?
I like that,
Yeah, breathing is key, because I see, and I know that pianists do this, I think, worse than anybody else with piano students, and they kind of stab at something. They're not even breathing, they're just in this kind of panicked mode of like, I can't play this thing, right? And you gotta just take a breath, don't judge yourself, just go, okay, what can I do differently this time that will make it better? Lose the ego. Get out of there. You're in your own head too much. Yeah, Nancy.
Did you come across any studies or even any testimonials about, say concert pianists, in the performance situation? Is it all interpretation in their minds? All the work has been done, the prep work is now done, and so what is their focus in the performance situation?
Well, yeah, you can ask kind of the same thing. You're practicing, you're focused, and you're very analytical. How do you make that switch when you're practicing performance or when you're performing?
I'd be happy to have other people sort of jump in on this, but I think, how analytical you are is, maybe I've misrepresented that a little bit. You need to be analytical in certain ways, but the presence that you feel is going to make you conscious of the sounds and awareness on an emotional and musical level of what's happening. So staying present and listening and hearing those things is part of that feeds right into what it's going to be like when I perform this. I play this thing, it sounds like that. How do I respond to that as a musician? Is part of that feedback loop that we have to have in order to respond and be creative on the spot. Because if we're not, and performance anxiety is a whole different topic. Performance anxiety a lot of times can block all of that, right? And you can't hear, you can't feel, we see it happen all the time. Students and performers will just sort of freeze up because they're not connected. So you got to have that connection. There is, I think there's a study by the same guy who did that one, the first one that I showed you, about performance. I didn't see a whole lot in there that applied to this, but I'd be happy to refer you to that. But I know there are studies about performance and performance anxiety and that sort of thing. But your practice, the essence of it is, your practice has to be what you're going to perform. Right, you can't go, well, I'm going to practice this thing like this, and I'm going to play it beautifully. It's not going to work that way. You have to be practicing with an ear, an eye, and a feel for what's going to happen. It doesn't mean you can't stop and practice in rhythms, make your fingers stronger, and do all those things that might help you. But it does mean that you have to always have that performance in mind and be measuring it against that. Like, is this gonna sound good when I get done?
Well, it might be obvious, but I think we also practice performing, and that's why we have things like repertoire class.
Right,
So it's not, we're not in the practice room, and then all of a sudden we flip the switch and now we're
right,
the perfect,
Right.
inspired performer. That's also part of the learning curve. And
Right.
so whatever performances we can set up for ourselves throughout our lives, not just when we're students, all these preparatory
right.
love
So
groups and tribes and playing for friends and in slightly lower pressure situations before the real thing comes down the pipe.
Yeah.
is
yeah, you have to get good at the performing piece of it. You know, that feeling of I often tell my students it's an extreme sport. Performing is an extreme sport because once you go off the cliff, that's it. You know, you just have to go for it. You can't lean back. You know, it's got to be like, here we go. Whatever happens is just going to happen. It's okay. I'm not going to get all over myself in the middle of the performance. I'm going to hope it's good. I've done good preparation. Here we go. And then you have to get used to that feeling because it is a little out of control feeling and you have to learn to work with that like a skier.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, and also Dr. Pierce. But to continue with Nancy's question, I think that performance is largely, the expression of the interpretation. But one has to still be able to be analytic during the performance. For instance, Kaya played the first movement of the Pathetique Sonata, Beethoven, and she made a decision to take the repeat in the exposition. So she has to know, okay, I'm going to a dominant seventh in the key of C so I can get back to the repeat. And then the second time she has to know, okay, now I'm going to a D7 because the development begins in G minor. And you have to practice thinking like that. And you have to carry that into your performance so that you don't just gray out in the middle of the piece. So you have to, as they both said, you have to practice so many different ways. But I do think, Nancy, that you can bring in some of the analytic thinking to the performance too.
Yeah, I often compare it to being, you have to stay in the driver's seat. So I tell my students, don't be the passenger. A passenger can look around and go, wow, that's really pretty. That's fine. Somebody's got to drive. So you can do both, but you have to be able to do both. And that's learning to perform really involves those things.
I'm wondering if from some of the questions that we sometimes think of preparing music as if it's flight work. We do this, and then we do another layer, and then we do
So the question was this layering effect that students have, and I've had them come in and say, well, I just learned the right hand, or I just learned the notes this week, I'll do dynamics next week. And that's what I was trying to get at with the artistic image. We need to work from the big picture and know where we're headed with things. And then all the little details will feed into that. But we really have to be doing it sort of all at once. Dr. Peters, I asked her if she had any sort of mantras that she took to the piano, like mine of don't touch the keys unless you're really there. And she said she doesn't really know when it started happening, correct me if I'm quoting you wrong, but she said now when she sits down to learn something, it all happens at once. It's like the fingering, the dynamic, the interpretation, memory, it all just, it's all in one. It's all going at the same time. It's not, I'll do this and then that and then this and then that, and then I'll have a whole piece. It's just all sort of organically coming from that final product that she knows she wants to produce, which is harder than it sounds.
I would say the approach to doing things separately almost never works. If you're doing that excessively, because it's so hard to pivot that one particular item against so many other factors. So like if you know, only did the right hand, then you wouldn't really know how it's going to relate to the balance of the left hand. Or, like you would lose maybe what you're going to do with the pedal because the syncopation of the left hand demands something a little different than the right hand solely demands.
Right. No, I think that's really important. Somebody said it's like trying to learn to ride a bicycle one leg at a time. As pianists, we do work two hands, and we always have harmony. And so we need to be conscious of that as we're learning. It doesn't mean never take your right hand out and practice it, or your left hand out and practice it. You've got a technical problem you need to focus on. Obviously, that's the solution, but that's not the baseline.
I wanted to say I really enjoyed how much you focused on this idea of visualization. I think
Good.
It's so important for all musicians to think about, but I think especially for pianists, because when we work away from an instrument a lot, or you just don't have that much time to get to your instrument. Let's say you have a teaching job, I can imagine all day. You have concerts coming up or things like this. But let's say you're going on tour somewhere and you can't always get to the instrument. It's not in your motel room.
Right.
You don't have this always constant access to your piano. So I think it's it behooves all keyboard players to be thinking about this early on, so that it really helps you.
You just removed half of their excuses. You know that, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't practice. Question?
Oh, no. Why?
I had a study, there was a study done about sleep and people, and they studied a person and actually a rat. they studied the brain functions of the person actually playing a game, and they would come up against problems, and they said, okay, now go sleep.
Right.
And they would fix that problem in their sleep, and then wake up and be able to do it better.
Yeah.
So sometimes, sleep on it, it's a real word.
It really does work.
It really does work. And some of the artists and inventors have actually gone to sleep and figured it out.
Right.
Sleep.
No, that is fairly well documented, and it's encouraging for all of us. And it's, again, another reason why you can't cram your practice, because we've got to have that cycle.
I was just, what Dr. Peter was saying, time away from your instrument. Like this summer I was in Southeast Asia, busing throughout it, right? And, I brought my violin, but, if you're on a bus for like 7 hours across the valley, and like the fumes are intoxicating. I found myself, because I had a lot of extreme problems with, different finger movements, just having isolation between certain fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, just sit there and, hold some fingers still. And then sooner or later, I figured out, I was little by little teaching myself, muscle nerve, creating muscle impulses in neurons.
Yeah. Actually, I just read something yesterday that blew my mind, and that is you can actually increase your muscle mass through visualization. So I told my husband, I'm not going to the gym anymore. But really, it's like, people who actually did weightlifting improved 20% muscle mass, whatever, and the people who thought about weightlifting got 13%. It was more than half as much. I know, which means thinking about moving your fingers can help. Okay, and I think really when you're looking at excellent musicians, what's happening is there's a lot going on in here that you can't see. It's not just that they show up to their instrument and practice. They're really focused on that stuff kind of all the time and developing all the time.
A lot of the stuff that you're talking about is in this one website, Bulletproof Musician. I don't know if you've heard
I
of it.
haven't heard of that. I think someone was mentioning it to me a couple days ago.
It's pretty cool.
Bulletproof Musician?
Yeah. So if you want any reminders, you can just visit that website.
Okay. Good source.
I have a question. A very respected teacher of mine said that she had to have carpal tunnel syndrome surgery. And she said that one reason her doctor said that she was actually doing this very thing in which you speak, she was always thinking about this particular piece. Her ends and she would actually find herself at some point looking down at her hand while she's thinking about this piece, and her fingers are tense. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because I suffer from repetitive strain because I have not carpal tunnel, but tendonitis in one of my wrists. Whereas I definitely believe in visualization. How do you help those who may have a bit of an excessive tendency to cope with maybe doing it a bit too much and causing pain and injury.
Ah, the OCD musician problem, yes. So, I don't know a whole lot about those types of injuries, but I am going to make the comment that if you have